The chair that Mr. Bruce is going to sit in is occupied by one financial fair play expert, Stefan Borson. Stefan, just back from sunnier climes. I suppose the way you look, you're looking very healthy, Mr. Borson, this morning. I suppose it's nicer studying company accounts where you were last week than it is in overcast London.
Yeah, the view's better when you're going through the notes of some...
I can think of some better views on holiday than accounts.
That's how sad I am. So there you go.
Not sad at all. You're bringing us right up to date with what's going on. A lot of people telling us it's a heavy old topic, but we're trying to stick with it. I think that's what you have to do. That's what I'm doing. Simon knows his stuff. Of course he does. And Stefan is an absolute expert in this field. So, Stefan, Everton host Forest this Sunday. It's in some quarters it's been called the points deduction derby. Nottingham Forest's appeal against their 4-point deduction is set to be heard next week. Everton have now lodged a formal appeal against their second points deduction. For both clubs, Stefan, I'm being asked to ask you, what is the best and worst case scenario?
So I think on both of them, worst case is 0. So nothing, no. They both got a case to run an appeal, arguable case, i.e., there's no realistic risk of any further points deductions. So these are free hits for both clubs. So that's easy, I think. I think it's also easy on the other side in that we're looking most likely at only a point on each one. Unless something comes out from left field. And in fairness, after Everton won, there was something from left field around this thing that we were discussing before on the duty of good faith. We didn't know from the outside that the Premier League had never even charged them with a breach of it. So we couldn't know that when it went to appeal, that was obviously going to be unwound because it should never have been part of the Independent Commission's adjudication. So unless there's something that we don't know about, I think Everton are fighting for a point and Nottingham Forest are fighting for a point.
A point back?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think the dilemma that probably both of the clubs have got is to whether to petition the appeal board for fractional points. And of course, from a footballing perspective, we'd all be horrified by them getting a half point back or a 0.2 back. But it seems to me that there is probably not strong arguments for a whole point back.
Are we talking half of points?
Well, it's a natural consequence of...
Oh, we went down by half a point.
Yeah, or you stayed up by 0.1 of a point.
You serious?
Well, it's just the way that the decisions have been made. So if you look at, for example, Everton...
Is there provisions for that, though? I mean, ultimately, the sporting merit is based upon points. Points have been established in principle. So is there any provision for an ability to be able to talk about a fraction of a point?
Well, they talk about fractional points in the Independent Commission so far.
Have they?
They've shied away from them.
I bet they have.
But likewise, if you look at the Everton decision does give 1 point for 2 matters that are not related. So if you think back on mitigation, they get 1 point for early admission and USM mitigation. We don't know how that is split. But let's say, for the sake of discussion, that the appeal thinks that the USM argument is very strong, right? But not strong enough for a whole extra point. So it thinks that they should have given the USM mitigation 1 point. Well, that means that we've got a fractional point because we've already got some mitigation for the early admission, which is, we know, is between 0, is between point...
I can't see them awarding off, but they'll MacGyver their way around it in some way or another. I can't see them taking themselves into that territory where they're prepared to award back a fraction of a point. Yeah, I think that will bring them challenging position.
I
agree.
What I can tell Leicester fans on the football front, we're going to be hearing from Kieran Dewsbury Hall tomorrow. I had a conversation with him, and the plan in hand is obviously to get to the Premier League. But on Leicester, Stefan, is this the messiest case of the lot? The EFL were forced to confirm last week that Leicester City were not at risk of a points deduction this season after admitting they did not have the power to punish clubs for Premier League breaches. What did you make of that?
The whole thing is a mess. I mean, it should have been dealt with by discussion and negotiation on both sides, actually, because what's happened is that it appears that the AFL wrote to the Premier League on the 20th of March and said, we recommend that you do an expedited case for 22-23 such that it's all done and dusted, including the appeal, by May the 4th. We know that there's no possibility that they could have gone through an entire process, including an independent commission and then an appeal and an appeal decision, all by May the 4th. But the EFL thought it was a good idea to write to the Premier League to support that idea. The Premier League then wrote to Leicester and said, yes, we're going to try and do this. It's nonsense. So Leicester then obviously resisted that. But in doing so, Leicester's whole approach has been to jeopardise the possibility of the most important thing that we've found about mitigation in these cases. And the most important thing about mitigation is twofold. One is early admission and two is cooperation, because it's worth between 2 and 3 points on any of these cases. And there's nothing else that's been close to getting that level of mitigation. So if you're a club who has breached, you want to be getting your 2 to 3 points of mitigation for early admission and cooperation. And what the EFL and the Premier League and Leicester as a group have made it really hard for Leicester to claim the full allowance of mitigation. What will happen now, of course, because it could never happen on that ridiculous expedited timetable of 21st of March to 4th of May, what will happen is that they will start next season, or early on next season, they will have a points deduction. And it'll be quite big, because it's a big breach.
You need to be clear, Jim, they have breached. There's no doubt they've breached. What they've sought to do is avoid adjudication. They've sought to avoid adjudication in the EFL by suggesting to the EFL, we don't have to provide you with accounts in November, because they didn't want to, because they weren't a member of the EFL in March when these things have to be done, because they didn't want the EFL telling them that they'd have to sell players in January and change their direction of travel. And then as a result of it, they wanted to be not adjudicated by the Premier League because they weren't in the Premier League in the season that the Premier League were going to be charging them on.
So are they looking at a points deduction even if they stay in the Championship? Or are they looking at points deduction even if they make it to the Premier League?
It gets complicated here because they're going to breach 23-24 as well. So they've got 2 points deductions coming. Okay? What we don't know is what happens to the 22-23 Premier League points deduction if they stay in the EFL. It's unclear. It's probable, I would think, that somehow they'll get a points deduction in the EFL, and then they'll be charged on 23-24, and they'll get a points deduction again in the EFL. If they get promotion...
Could they carry it as a tariff and suspended in terms of when they land if they land in the Premier League, they land in the Premier League with a sanction, if they find themselves in that grey area?
Well, we don't know. It is possible, but I suspect not, because I don't see that there is a kind of compelling argument why these things should be suspended. I think the message from most of the independent commissions is no suspensions of any penalties. Get them done when they're done.
I mean, to me, Stefan, it highlights that there's no joined-up thinking in this matter between the Premier League and the EFL.
Well, if you don't think there's joined-up thinking right now, wait until they try and change the whole PSR regime, because if those two regimes don't match quite closely, then it's going to be utterly impossible. But look, they've tried to make them match, and they've tried to talk to each other, and that's why when you get
it's almost an impossible circle to square. I mean, ultimately, you look at Nottingham Forest. Some would say that it's inherently unfair that Nottingham Forest carry losses of a lesser type, i.e. lower budgets and lower loss allowances, into the Premier League, and the first time they're in the Premier League, they get sanctioned as a result of breaching the profit and loss they're allowed because they were allowed lower limits. You can't. This is one of those circles that financial fair play, or what the ridiculous entitlement of it becomes next, produces, and that's the problem that you've got.
I mean, there's a twist on this one as well, because the Nottingham Forest case was very clear that promotion bonuses can't be allowable deductions and are not even mitigation. But Nottingham Forest at least had the countervailing factor, and this is how it's described in the decision. They had the countervailing increase of revenue, so they had the promotion bonuses in 21-22, and then at least had the revenue in 22-23 when they breached. What about Leeds United if they get promotion this season? Leeds United, if they get promotion this season, may well fail PSR because of a £20 million hit for promotion bonuses. But of course, this season, they've not had the countervailing revenue increase. They've actually had a revenue decrease. So, ironically, by getting promotion, they could fail PSR and be punished in the Premier League, even though the only reason they failed is because they got promotion.
God almighty. I wonder what the players think of that. They're driving to training grounds at the moment, Stefan, and they're hearing that. Stefan, in 10 years' time, and let's finish on this, how will English football look back on these last 24 months and the purpose of it?
Well, look, we've got to get through the fun and games of next season, first of all, right? So it's very hard.
They're going to change the rules.
Well, it's very hard. No. Let's just be clear what's planned. They're not planning to change the rules for the current season. The current plan is for future seasons. So the current plan
25-26
is for a 105 limit for 23-24. Now, I would suggest that there is a possibility that the clubs together are suggesting that maybe we should ease up the limits for the current season retrospectively, because so many clubs are on the brink of failing, and we think probably 5 to 7 clubs will be close for the current season. So question whether the clubs themselves decide that actually going to increase the 105 to maybe 135, maybe. But let's say they don't do that. This current season is going to have a whole load of points deductions. Then what we're talking about is changing the rules for the seasons after. There are so many unknowns about what that regime will look like, if it looks like anything at all, in terms of, are they going to lose their bottle completely on the whole profit and sustainability type regimes? Are they going to follow UEFA? If they follow UEFA, is it going to be the two-legged test? We've heard a lot about squad control. There's a lot of nonsense spoken about squad control. Squad control is not, let's take the revenue and say 70, 80% is what you're allowed to spend. There's a whole complicated equation there. And by the way, in terms of transparency and understanding whether teams have passed or are likely to pass, because of the way that those rules are constructed around the cost of a first-team squad, we are going to have no idea, because those numbers aren't broken out in the accounts. We don't know, for example, how much of the agent's bills that a club is wearing in a particular year has been capitalised versus the amount that's been charged to the profit and loss. So there's going to be a whole load of unknowns. Alongside that, in the UEFA rules, there are still PSR-type tests that have limits. It's just that those limits are bigger. So it's a two-pronged UEFA test.
Yeah.
We don't know if it's going to be replicated in the Premier League. And then on top of that, it needs to be matched with the EFL. So are the EFL going to follow? Is it all going to be joined up? What are they going to look like? And then the key point, are we going to have points deductions for breaches of these types of rules? The Premier League has argued very, very vigorously in every independent commission and appeal so far that sporting sanctions are appropriate because sporting advantage has been gained by the spending that's occurred. Are they now going to throw that in the bin and say, oh no, don't worry, going forward, spending breaches are now just cash problems, and actually forget everything we said about the importance of sporting advantage and the importance of overspending on transfers? Forget all that. Let's pretend it didn't happen. Let's pretend all of these points that have been taken off Everton and Nottingham Forest. Let's pretend it didn't happen. Are they going to do that? I mean, that's what they're sort of talking about. We will see.
You've got to take a little break in the sunshine more often. You come back absolutely laden with information. Stefan Borson, not for the first time, thank you so much for joining us. Stay with us.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.